Today we're going to look at The Terrible Old Man by H.P. Lovecraft. This is a fairly short story, and I enjoy the way that it was written. It has a lot of great details in it, but it also has a number of issues. And compared with some of the previous stories we've read, it's actually fairly mild. So now we get into the situation where if this had been the first story I read, I would have been upset with some of the issues that it has. But now that I've seen the true depths of depravity that Lovecraft is willing to go, you say, oh, this one's really not that bad in the grand scheme of things, which, isn't a good situation to be in, but that's the way that these things are going. So we've got Angelo Ricci and Joe Chanek and Manuel Silva. So he's calling out the Spanish/Puerto Rican groups, the Italian groups, and we'll say the Polish groups as being the first three characters. And if we know anything about Lovecraft, it's that these are not characters that he would want to have in his normal settings, that these must be evil intruders with no morals that are ugly and mentally ill and all sorts of other things. So when we get these three names, we know what's coming. Now they're coming to take on the terrible old man. So they're not presenting this old man as being, I don't know, some innocent person. They're calling him terrible. But put up against the three immigrants, clearly the terrible old man is the one that we're supposed to be sympathizing with. He's in a very ancient house on Water Street. Now, I find this amusing because I lived in Providence, right around the corner from where Lovecraft was writing a lot of these things, and I lived right near Water Street. So, immediately I can start imagining the ancient houses along that area and an old person living in there. There were a lot of very, very wealthy people living in that region. So he's exceedingly rich and exceedingly feeble, and apparently these three foreign named people are robbers, because of course that's what foreign named people are. They're either laborers or robbers or both. So they're calling this town Kingsport. I'm pretty sure it's Providence, but we'll call it the fictional town of Kingsport. And they say that the locals, the native locals, the white rich locals and poor locals, know to not harass the terrible old man because they think of him as dangerous, but that these foreigners don't realize that, so they're going to rob him because that's what foreigners do. And they say that the terrible old man was a captain in East India. No one can remember him because he is so old. They don't remember back when he was young, and he's doesn't talk a lot to people, so they don't really know what his real name is. Which seems very odd. You would think someone around here would know who this person was, because there were a lot of old people in Providence and probably in Kingsport. But they're saying that all of the old people somehow have all forgotten who the real name is, or maybe they just don't want to speak of him. Maybe they don't want to risk his wrath. And his front yard is full of gnarled trees and strange collections of large stones oddly grouped and painted, so they resemble idols in obscure Eastern temples. So he's set up his house to be scary and keep away the boys who like to break windows and all those kinds of things. And the old people who take a look through the windows, older than the young boys, see that he's got bottles with pieces of lead suspended in them like pendulums, and that he talks to them with names like Jack and Scarface and Long Tom, which, are perfectly rational names. You wouldn't want to have a name like Angelo Ricci, but you could have a name like Scarface or Long Tom, and that's particularly fine. So he talks to these bottles of lead pendulums, and they vibrate and answer. So we're assuming that these are his crew members who are now dead, and that he's able to communicate with their spirits through the use of these lead pendulums. Which, people have all sorts of, even if you go to Salem nowadays, they have pendulums that you can hang and talk to the dead with. So this is not a forgotten thing. This is something that people still do nowadays and has a long history. So anyway, these three foreigners of the new alien stock, which lies outside the charmed circle of New England life and traditions, are coming in solely wanting to rob this old man because they know he has lots of money, and they just have to beat him up and be able to get the information of where he has it hidden. So they decide that April 11th, I'm surprised it's not October sometime because that's how these stories tend to go, but it's April 11th is the day that they decide they're going to do their robbery. And two of them decide that they're going to go in and do the interview. This is the part that I like. I like the way that he talks about that they're going to interview the poor old gentleman while the other one is going to wait for them and their presumable metallic burden. So he makes it seem like a very gentle stop, that they're just going to talk with him and he's going to hand over his burden of metal stuff, which they will happily take care of for him. So I do like Lovecraft's language in many of these cases. I just wish that he was writing about uh, not racist topics. So anyway, the three men go out separately so that they are not identified with each other in the case of, when the burglary is discovered, and they go down to Water Street. And again, just I love reading Lovecraft in part because these are all places that I walked around all the time, so it makes me happy to think about these scenes. And then the two men go in planning on, in essence, torturing the terrible old man to find out where his treasure is, while the third guy is waiting behind in a car to be able to pick them up and take them off to freedom. So the two guys go up and don masks and knocked politely at the weather-stained oaken door. And meanwhile, the third guy is hanging out in his car, waiting and waiting. And he was normally tender-hearted, and he didn't like the hideous screams he heard in the ancient house. And had he not told his colleagues to be as gentle as possible with the pathetic old sea captain, so he of course assumes that it's his friends beating up the old sea captain, and the old sea captain is refusing to tell them where all of his treasure is. So he waits and waits, and he worries that maybe they actually killed the old guy and didn't even discover where the treasure was. And then finally he hears a soft tread or tapping, and he's waiting for his friends to come out, and then he looks and he realizes that it's the terrible old man who is still alive after all this screaming and looking perfectly healthy, and that the guy's eyes are yellow. So now he's concerned because his friends were in there, and then there was screaming noises, and now the old guy is looking perfectly healthy and coming out to talk to him. And then we skip right over to, all three bodies, unidentifiable, because apparently no one knows who these darn foreigners are, and they were just didn't have any friends or family or anything else, horribly slashed as with many cutlasses, horribly mangled by the tread of many cruel boot heels, and the tide washed them in. And the car was found deserted, and some people heard the screams and didn't know what it was. And the terrible old man is still sitting there doing his thing. And it says, so ancient a sea captain must have witnessed scores of things much more stirring in the far-off days of his unremembered youth. So as with all of these stories, the scary parts are not really mentioned. It's more about just the psychological setup and this thought that there were three evil foreigners trying to do harm to this reclusive sea captain. And while they keep calling the sea captain a terrible old man, they never say that he does anything terrible. I mean, he just has stones out front of his house and he talks to little waving pieces of lead inside bottles, but we don't even know what's in the bottles. We just sort of assume that they're the souls of his shipmates. And then the three evil foreigner robbers come in and they are quickly killed, and we don't have any sort of guilt at all about them being slaughtered when, sure, they were coming in to rob the guy, but did they really deserve to be tortured and slaughtered? And, just all sorts of issues with that whole construct. So we sort of are supposed to respect the old sea captain, and everyone else respects him and fears him. And I suppose it goes back to that cat story for me, that there was the couple that everyone in town knows to fear and respect and stay far away from. And then it's the foreigner who comes in and is willing to take them on. And in the cat story, the foreigner ends up winning because he enlists the help of all the cats, and the cats all eat them. In this case, the foreigners come in and the foreigners pay the price for not respecting what the local status quo is. And the old sea captain gets his due. He's able to defend himself and slaughter them all so that they can't hurt anyone else. So a bit extreme action of the death penalty in place here. So what did I think? It's fairly short. I like the description in here. I really like the way that these robbers are described to have a interview with him, with the sea captain, and how they're going to meet with him, and everything's laid out as being very calm and rational and gentlemanly. And the things that they're going to do to him are all described in ways that, it's just a meeting, and they're just going to talk with him. So I enjoyed all of that kind of wordplay in there. But I find it, as I've said, very iffy that he is going after three of the main immigrant groups in Providence. I mean, there were all sorts of issues in Providence with the Irish and the Italians all fighting amongst each other and that sort of thing, and he takes it to a whole nother extreme here. And like I said, he's got in his crew names, Spanish Joe and Scarface. So the crew, and this is true for the ships back in the 1800s and 1700s, the crews were often very mixed and everyone respected each other, and what mattered was the way that you were able to do your job. So it's odd that he then says that this um, captain is so preoccupied with, I suppose it's not the captain that's preoccupied with the races of the people. It's Lovecraft writing it, that he sets it, that he has to set it, that it's these three races of people and not just locals that are robbing him. And I suppose his claim would be that the locals knew not to mess with this guy and it had to be someone coming in, but he didn't have to make them like these three specific immigrant groups that came in. It could have been anyone that came in from another town that didn't know this local person. So I have mixed feelings about this. I enjoy the writing style. I have issues with the particular characters he chose to represent in the book. And I really like that it's set in Providence and in locations that I can relate to and that I can envision strongly in my mind, which helps bring the whole story to life. So let me know if you have any questions about this story or if you have different points of view about the scenes that we've gotten here.